everyone, and welcome to another episode of On the Mic with our Let's Talk Hacking video series. We are super excited. Today we've got with us HILARY WALTON, who's going to be talking to us about all things interesting around the human firewall. It doesn't sound as daunting as I just said it. She's going to make this super interesting for us. Now, first off, HILARY, Chief Information Security Officer from Korea. This woman is a legend. She's all about digital transformation. She's a psychologist. She's a podcaster. You name it, she has done it. And she's super, super passionate about everything that's related to digital culture. HILARY, welcome. Thank you so much for joining Dave and myself. And before I kick off, I'm going to be fan voting on this. Finalists in the Women of Influence Awards for 2020. Tell us quickly. I think our listeners, especially our female listeners, are going to be really excited to hear about this.
Yeah, so Women of Influence, it's something that I've been sort of tracking across the years, and then I think kind of this year I thought maybe I've finally got enough to, see if I can get nominated, and apparently I did because they put me on the finals list, so really excited about it. I'm in the board and management category, and it's all around what I've been doing with security at Korea, but then also some of the external kind of thought leadership that I've been doing as well, similar to what you guys are doing now.
Oh, sounds great. So there you heard it, guys. You heard it here first. So when HILARY wins, we are definitely going to be cheering her on. So, Human Firewall. Let's talk about security culture and human firewall, what it's about. Because I'll be honest, the first time you sort of sent that through to us, it sounded very interesting, and I had really not known about it. So I think our listeners would love to understand what this whole concept is about.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know how each organisation has a kind of unique culture that sort of influences how it operates? Mm-hmm. Well, how an organisation behaves in terms of its style and approach to security is its security culture. And what happens is that with security culture, it's all about getting your staff to be really motivated about security, want to follow security practices, do those really good security behaviours, and all of those amount up in essentially kind of a human firewall, if you like, rather than a technical firewall.
Oh.
And the reason security culture is really important is because it can help businesses with things like loss of IP. If you've got a good security culture, then you don't have as many compromised systems. If you have any major incidents, then it can help recover from those really quickly. Or even if you just have minor ones, it can help recover from those quickly as well. And the other thing is, when you've got a good security culture, often that also protects the brand of the company and the CEO and the board and things like that as well. Okay. So it is really important.
And how did you get interested in this?
Kind of an interesting story there too. So as you mentioned, I'm a psychologist. That's where I started my career. And I originally worked for the Royal New Zealand Air Force as a psychologist with them. Mm-hmm. And then I jumped out and I went business consulting in psychology and did that in Aussie and in London. And then over in London, the consulting company I was working for had this sort of special relationship in with MI5, which sounds kind of odd, but we were doing some of their assessment centres, and then they had a need for a psychologist to come work with them in their behavioural science unit to work on this security culture project. And so I thought, that sounds amazing, it's MI5, not going to turn that down. So got the opportunity to work in there and kind of help them develop a measurement tool for security culture, and then also spoke to different organisations in the UK, critical national infrastructure organisations, about, okay, if this is your security culture but you're trying to get to this more aspirational culture, what do you do to get there? How do you change behaviour? How do you change people's mindsets? Wow. And and then I kind of went from talking about security with MI5 to then having to really implement a security culture for the London Olympics, which was my next role. Wow. And it was 12 months before the game, and it was essentially a building company that built the Olympic Park, but they had to really turn it to be games time operational. So it was all about developing a really strong security culture, because at the same time, leading the information security department, we were taking access from them, we were making it more difficult, we were blocking them. So you want to make sure people aren't cutting corners in that kind of project, because it's such an important kind of end goal, and you don't want the games compromised and things like that. So went from talking about it to doing it. And then once finished that, came back to New Zealand, but I still had this security culture thing in me. Like I was like, oh, I need to get this out somehow. And so I ended up writing a book over a couple of maternity leaves about how you build a security culture. So I just really loved it, just got really into it, became a bit of a passion project, and yeah.
So I'm interested to know if you got any key influences or aha moments along the way that really solidified, I guess, and knew that you're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, well, working in security, I did find at the time it was a lot of I'm just going to say like 60-year-old men, kind of with that police background. I didn't see many people like me in security, and certainly not many psychologists either. So part of me was like, am I onto something here, or like seriously, because no one was really doing much about it at that time. Like I was literally Googling around security culture, and you wouldn't find much in that space. But then I came across a couple of books, and they were my kind of aha moments. So one was called Nudge. I don't know if you remember that book, but it was called Nudge Theory. And it was all about how you use positive reinforcement to indirectly change behaviour in people's thinking. And so I saw that and I was like, that's super interesting. So a nudge is, for example, so if you want people to stop eating junk food, then a nudge would be that you put the healthy food at eye level. And so people are walking past and they kind of go, oh yeah, healthy food. Something that's not a nudge would be like banning junk food, if that makes sense. So it's used a lot in economics and political kind of realms as well. Like the policymakers are always trying to nudge people into the right behaviours, be it security or whatever it might be.
Sounds very much like retail, in the retail sector. We put everything, when I worked in FMCG, we put everything at eye level. That's
a really actually key analogy you make, because a lot of what I was reading in this book called Nudge and in this other book called Herd Theory was taken from the marketing and retail kind of area. Because for years and years they've been thinking about how do we change behaviour and make people buy my product or repurchase the product or attract them to it. And so I actually looked at all of those marketing kind of theories and then tried to apply that into a security world and how that might look. So from a security example of a nudge then is I've been sort of redesigning our intranet. So intranets are actually, to be honest, they're a lot better than they used to be. They're a much better comms platform than we've ever had before. But one of the nudges I've been designing in there is on the homepage, I have a little kind of button, if you like, where people can report a security concern. And then right next to it, I've got make a security suggestion. Now, those two buttons actually go to the same form. And they can just, decide what they want to do there. But I've separated out the buttons because I want people to think, oh, I've got a security concern, I want to report that. Oh, I could actually make a suggestion as well. So that they're actually thinking about not just the negative parts of security, but actually what some of the positive behaviours or suggestions might be, so that you can keep that kind of continual improvement happening as well.
Love it. A lot of people are still pretty concerned about talking about security at a board level and executive level. Might be because it's an unfamiliar territory. So love for you to talk about how you might be able to continually encourage the discussion around this topic at a board level, at an exec level, because it is such an important topic for us to be discussing today.
Look, I've actually really found that as well. Like, so you're having a security governance meeting, if you have those, hopefully most organisations do. And then I find I'm presenting a lot of material and there might be like only one person questioning me on it, or maybe two, and you're kind of thinking, that's not right. Like, we should have more people in that kind of conversation around security. And it actually probably goes to something that you said earlier, Jess, when you were talking about, particularly at that level, people kind of feel like they need to know everything. I know this is one of the tenets of what you're trying to do with the speaking series. And if they're at a senior level and they don't, well, they probably won't say much because they're, they don't want to look like they don't know what they're talking about and things like that. So we kind of need to somehow break down the barriers for that group. One thing I've been doing is in those kind of meetings, those governance meetings, like some of them, particularly the exec group, I've sort of found maybe this doesn't have to happen monthly. It could be every 2 months or something, this kind of exec governance. But I was talking to a colleague and he said, no, you should definitely have it every month, because actually what was happening was they ended up being an education session for the exec. So if you're seeing them monthly talking about security things, by the time a year goes by, they've learned a whole lot more that they didn't know before, and then hopefully have more questions coming around what's actually happening and the performance of security and things like that.
Right, nice.
And I'm really trying to tie a lot of that security piece also to health and safety, because there's a really good model there. Like, there are a lot of executives and board members very happy to talk about health and safety and ask challenging questions because they've gone through the education program, they get it, and they're also accountable with their obligations as well. So, it's trying to put security in that same bracket. And there's a couple of things at the moment which is really helping with that. So one is the Privacy Act changes that are coming in. So that's really elevated, December the 1st. That's really elevated the view of security, because security and privacy are so coupled together.
True.
And now executive and board, they're starting to think, oh, hold on, this is, I'm actually obligated to report to the Privacy Commissioner if we don't handle something well. And then it's all about their brand and things like that as well. So I think that's really helping.
So, I mean, you being a chief information security officer, I suppose a lot of companies who have chief information officers or people in general that are heading up these areas. I think a big part of what you feel is you having to do PR and comms and marketing without actually having the title or the budget sort of around that. I mean, what is your feeling on that? What's your take on it? How do you get around that?
We're actually asking those people in those roles, chief information security officers or even CIOs, chief information officers, there's almost two stark skill sets that we're asking them to do or to manage as a function, if they're lucky enough to have a function. Not all organisations are big enough to have one. There's that whole technical side with that really deep technical knowledge that they have around, security architecture and pen testing and, all of that stuff. And then on the other side, there's this sort of broad principle-based knowledge that we're asking people to have around governance and product management and awareness, and they are really different. So I think that is difficult for chief information security officers as a point one. And then, like you say, point two, you need to do all this awareness, and not just awareness. If we're talking about culture, it's more than that. It's actually having a conversation with people and trying to change their behaviour. So how do you do that when you don't have heaps of budget? It is really tricky. So I suppose it's like trying to almost create that ambassadorship culture in your organization, right? That everybody becomes a mini spokesperson in a way, and becomes passionate about that subject matter, not just the CIO. Okay. And I also think another good idea on that for organizations is you're in an enterprise role if you're doing security or IT. So use the people in your enterprise, join up with your HR team, join up with your health and safety team, join up with the comms team in particular, and kind of, be part of the system, not just this kind of silo that sits on its own. Yeah.
Even for small businesses, I think one of the ideas that we've been kicking around here is encouraging customers to throw cybersecurity training into inductions of new employees, for example. That's one example, right, of this should be so important. We shouldn't just learn about the day-to-day role, but somewhere in that first month we should be talking about cybersecurity. So that's maybe one way of ingraining in our culture. But I guess on the back of that, what are some ways that we can actually measure, assess cybersecurity culture in a business? How do we actually do that?
Yeah, so I've looked at this in detail, as you know, through my work with MO5 and then with the book as well. Culture's kind of a hard thing to measure, and it's really interesting when you look at the theory, security culture. They can't necessarily find what that is as a concept, because it's security and it's culture. So when they do lots of the psychometric tests around what is security culture, it's hard to come up with exactly what that looks like. But there definitely are ways you can measure it, and it's probably through some of the things you might think about in terms of checklists or surveys or focus groups or workshops. Those kind of things are good ways to get different information about security. The easiest is probably the checklists. So for example, our board receive information about security every month, yes or no. Our employees get, cybersecurity induction information, when they join, yes or no. So so that's kind of an easy way to do a bit of a litmus test.
Yes.
The next step up is when you start doing a bit more of an actual survey, where you're starting to ask it's kind of deeper information. So you might be asking about security behaviours and the frequency of them. You might be asking about the staff's knowledge of like the threat landscape and what the threats and the risks are to the organisation. Right. And you kind of do it on like a 5-point scale and things like that. Right. But sometimes the most sort of stark assessment of a security culture is what happens when you walk around an organisation and kind of what you see and feel and kind of pick up on based on the people and how they're behaving. So
we've done, so it's a really good example. Let's say a business has assessed and measured what that looks like. There must be some kind of output now. We want to go from, all right, we've measured ourselves at about a 3.2 out of 5, or hopefully not out of 10. And but how do I get from a 3.2 to a 6.8 by next quarter or whatever? What are some of the things that you might encourage people to do to actually improve that?
So one of the really cool things about measuring a security culture is it also acts as a bit of an awareness thing, because people are like, wow, they're asking me about security. They must think this is important. Okay, that's interesting. So that kind of sets the tone for it.
Very true.
And then the other point you picked up on there is that you're setting kind of an aspiration of you're here in terms of your security culture and you want to improve it to here. So that now sets a course of direction for the company. So that, if you want to improve this element of your security culture, well, then you need to think about different initiatives you can do to do that. So what's a good example? Let's say something quite simple. One of the big things around your security culture that you want to get people thinking about is tailgating, so that they don't just kind of let people into the organisation who don't have the right pass or that they don't know, that kind of thing. So if we look at what makes up security culture, it's actually kind of a system which lives within your organisation. So you should think of it like any other organisational change. So first thing you want to do is make sure you've got that management buy-in to whatever the change is. There's no point telling staff not to tailgate if senior managers are going to not bother with that, for example. So senior management is a really important lever or mechanism you can use to change culture and security culture in this example. Otherwise, you can do things like make sure you've got fit-for-purpose organisational systems. So that's like the induction you just mentioned. So insert that into the induction if that's the thing that you want to change, making sure that, when people start in their first month, they're hearing, don't let people tailgate, that kind of thing. Another one is you start to use more kind of psychological mechanisms, which sounds like, sophisticated, but like peer pressure, for example. So if you're buddying someone up who's just starting your organisation and, they see that the buddy doesn't let people tailgate, then they are more likely to, comply with that as well. And never forget the power of actually line managers and the people who lead us. It's their
Shadow
behaviour.
of the leader.
Totally. It's their behaviour that we probably follow the most. So it's thinking about what those kind of mechanisms are, and there's a bunch of different ones that you can use.
So it's interesting, as Dave was speaking earlier about how you measure. He was like, oh, well, hopefully it's not out of 10. What is it actually then out of? Because I'm like, I'm trying to think in my head, how do you measure this? Or is it, or does the criteria change based on an organization or what is coming? Is there a specific measurement?
The way I would measure it, particularly if you're going down a survey route, well, there's a couple of different ways. First of all, if you're doing a checklist, then there are some checklists out there that you can use. For example, I know it's called WINS. It's like the World Nuclear Security kind of group. They've got some free checklists that you can use. I mean, obviously they're protecting some pretty good security cultures in the nuclear space, so they're really mature on this journey. So you should look to that for inspiration. Otherwise, you want to choose some kind of security culture model and then measure to the different mechanisms in that model. Is kind of my...
I suppose that's actually a really good point, right? It's at the same time, it's actually quite interesting that there are so many models. There isn't necessarily one global standard, right?
No.
In New Zealand, you become an accountant, and this is the process we go through. Becoming a security analyst or expert, you can follow WINS or NIST, or there's this and that. There's so many different best practices. I suppose at the end of the day, a right fit model for a different business segment or industry might be a best choice. Have you got any idea on that?
Absolutely. And if you're the type of organisation that is already doing health and safety surveys, have a look at the questions in that survey, because it's going to be around leadership and behaviours and all of those things that probably mirror security pretty well. It's kind of a baseline kind of thing to look at as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So your feedback on, do you think it's worthwhile to personalize security communications to the individual wherever possible?
It kind of feels like it should be, shouldn't it? Like it should the security behaviours of our staff should be worth personalising them, because people that's what people experience in their day-to-day lives. You know, they open up the home screen with their phone and it's personalised for them. But you know, in terms of what kind of apps they want first and folders and whatever that might be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think you should. I mean, the problem is there's kind of an economics argument here a wee bit as well. Like it would take more time, cost more to deeply personalise for a staff member. So for example, if you've got a policy which is, I don't know, your acceptable use policy around IT, if you personalise that for every staff member who has a different role and might be in a different team in a different location, it's going to be hard to upkeep, right?
True.
But it feels like we should. So if we can't personalise for everyone, maybe we should, as security practitioners, be more focused in terms of what we give people. So you know, this type of person doesn't need everything in the acceptable use policy because they're not dealing with that, but they do need these key things.
Right.
And maybe doing it that way. But I am quite hot on this subject. My colleague, Stephen Coates, who works in Aura, we talk about policy 3.0, like how do you give people policy, how to communicate, because writing a policy is the first step. How do you communicate policy in a way that people are actually going to listen, because that's what you're doing, you're fighting for their attention. So is it a meme, is it a checklist, is it a crossword, is it, I don't know, a video, talking heads video, whatever it is, can you meet them there somehow?
Really good point.
And that's what I'm
What are your thoughts on what's happening in New Zealand right now when it comes to cybersecurity and security culture within organizations? How do you think we're handling it as a country? Do you think it goes right above people's heads, or
I think that cybersecurity is really on the world stage at the moment, particularly in New Zealand. We're getting a lot of press around it. I still don't think we're doing enough in the culture and behaviour piece for security. Like, even if I look at what I'm doing at Cordia, like I sit there and I go, I'm still not doing enough. Like I'm the security culture expert here, I should be doing more. Like I'm not sure we've really gone to the next level in terms of communicating and, you know, security behaviours and things like that. I think we're still probably doing things that we were doing 5 years ago, a little bit, you know. I'm not sure what it takes to get us to the next level, whether it's more security professionals learning about how to be human beings and how human beings' minds work, and, you know, behavioural kind of stuff. I'm not sure, but I think we do need to try to make that jump. But the comforting thing is it's not just in security. It's kind of with any subject, even, you know, health and safety and things like that. There's still more that people could be doing, but you've just got to get that groundswell of the organisation kind of up to a tipping point first.
So any parting words of wisdom for our listeners?
Ooh, on the spot. That's okay. I think, you know, having the conversation around security culture is the first step, and having that conversation at the highest level in your organisation, at that exec kind of table. And then, you know, thinking about even how can you spoon-feed some of those senior leaders to help kind of get those security messages through the organisation, because I think security culture is formed not just in how I, the CISO, communicate with you, but actually through the osmosis of you then talk to another staff member who talks to another staff member, and did you see that, and it's that. You need to kind of create that in organisations.
Awesome. Well, there you have it, guys. You heard it here first from On the Mic, and let's talk hacking with IT360. I'm Jess Mason, Head of Marketing for IT360, and today Dave Wilson, our CEO of IT360, have had the privilege of having an amazing chat with Hilary Walton. She will be back, we promise you, because she's got lots of amazing knowledge to share with us. So please, if you are not following us, follow us on our page, and look forward to forthcoming video series that will feature Hilary and some amazing other speakers from within New Zealand. That's it for today, guys. See you later.